Okay, I'm going to walk through the second part of this presentation. So you'll notice that our first video ends here on slide 13, and that's the end of part one. Now I'm going to kind of go through and get us set for, let's hide that, for the remainder, excuse me, of this presentation. And remember that this is just to go back and pause and play and review a slide as needed. So we'll start off on part one ends with this image here, and we can make some guesses as to what we see happening. I see some fire happening over there. I see a U.S. flag here. See some structures around the way there. Everything's kind of looks like it's built in a square. Wonder what I see. Our objectives for part two. In part two, we're going to be looking at the war. We're going to look at who was fighting in the war and the immediate aftermath of the war. Also, we'll look at the effects that the war had on the Dakota people living within Minnesota. That's our goal for part two. This is the slide where this video will appear. So by the time you get to it, this video will be in this big old box. As you go through the very first part of part two, we'll have a video for you to watch, about 2 minutes, involving the war, and we should be prepared to answer it on the following slides. Move this over. Inside of that video, what were some of the many factors that contributed to the U.S.-Dakota War? You'll create a box, use the toolbar to box any and all correct answers. So I'll show you what that will look like. Here are my options. I have a crop failure in 1861, hunting animals, which were becoming more scarce. Let's fix that, huh? And then we have the Dakota, who are all willing to leave Minnesota, treaty money, which was not delivered on time, and more newcomers were pushing the Dakota off the land. So I'm going to create a box, and the way that you do that is on the toolbar. So check out my mouse. It's up over here on the shape area. So over there, right there, is my shape button. If I go through and I click that shape button, and then it will allow me to go into my shapes, and I'm creating a box. So I'll click this one. I'm going to click my box. If I believe that crop failure was mentioned in the video and it was part of the factors, I'm going to make my box here. You'll see the blue appear around the box of crop failure, and now it's completely covered up. You'll know that I can no longer see what's there. The way that you fix that is I am going to go off onto that shape, and I'm going to go back up to here where it says fill color. You see? So here's our box. Here's fill color, and I'm going to make it transparent. So now I have a box around the crop failure. If I also believe that animals were becoming more scarce, I can take that box and I can duplicate it by pressing Control D. And now I've made another box, and I can resize it to fit the hunting animals, which are becoming more scarce, if I believe that's my next answer. Shape. Create a box. Once you make a box, it kind of goes to everything underneath it, so you have to click the fill color, and you make it transparent. So I'm going to go off, and I'll delete my boxes here, and enter back into my slideshow. Using the linked page, right here, describe specific events and specific dates as mentioned on the timeline page, 1 sentence per box. So I see one date says August 17, one date says August 19 to the 25th, and September 26th. So I click the war timeline, and to remind myself, August 17. So I'm going to scroll down, and I know that's the war spot because it's circled here. See video number 1 for how to look at those underlining tabs. And I would like to talk specifically about August 17, right? August 17. August 17. So if I click August 17, I have a description of what was happening here. And the next one was August 19 to 25. If I click August 19 to 25, here's my description. I'm going to take and I'm going to summarize that in my own words. One sentence here. I'm going to move this over. This is a drawing of the murders that took place on Acton County. And this drawing was drawn 47 years after the event. What problem might happen because of that? So if I know that this drawing here was 47 years after, what problem might there be? As I'm looking through, I can see some things happening right there. That looks like someone's firing a weapon at somebody who's running away. I see something happening here. Someone's inside of that house. On this section, doesn't look like there's much happening, but over here I see evidence of what looks like a wagon, so that could be somebody who's a newcomer showing up over there. Your job is to describe what problems would happen if someone's trying to draw the events of, for this case, the murders. What problem is there if somebody's making this drawing 47 years after the event happened? And using complete sentences, I'm going to describe the image on this slide. I might be looking again to see what's happening and what I'm looking at. I can see that there is a little fence here all the way around, and inside of that fence I see a collection of teepees. And I remember from my Unit 2 and Unit 3 that inside each teepee you can put a whole extended family. And so there's a lot of people who are living inside of this spot. And this looks like a river right here, doesn't it? This looks like some sort of river. So this could be... That also looks like a river, doesn't it? Kind of comes in here almost. If it keeps going, would that make this whole section? That would make it an island, wouldn't it? I wonder if that's an island that we've talked about. Using a complete sentence, you'll describe what you see here. Your next slide tells you that this is the Fort Snelling internment site. And so looking at this island again, that's kind of in this green, I would know that that island would be Bdote. So this is an island that we've talked a lot about in class. This tells me that this is where 1,700 Dakota and 2,000 Ho-Chunk people were imprisoned for 7 months over winter. Between 130 to 300 of these people died here in the Fort Snelling internment camp over the span of that winter. And again, located down on the bottom here, you're able to see that that link, this brings me to more information about the internment camp. I have to go back to be able to move forward. There we go. This is a video that will provide more information as well. Go back. This image was taken in 1862 to 63 during that winter period of the Dakota in the internment camp. Unlike the previous picture, this was not staged. It was unposed. The individuals in this picture did not know that they were going to have their picture taken. So in this blue box, I would be describing what I see as the living conditions within the camp. So I might be looking through, and maybe I'm going to look at that group of people. Maybe I'll look to see what this person's doing. Some of you might even describe what the living conditions are. So maybe I'd look on the ground and see what the environment might be. Looking at the wall, it does not look like a pleasant spot to be in any sense of the word. And I know that this was taken over winter, and I also know that we've talked about how teepees were used as a summer housing for many of the Dakota. All my descriptions would go into that text. You have a little overview video here. Skip that to the next one. And we go into the trial after and kind of occurring during as well. So this scene is going to be the painting a depiction of somebody who is signaling out. So this boy is pointing out someone who he believes took part in the U.S. Dakota War. Some information about your trial. One day, the trial was one day. There were 392 Dakota prisoners who were tried, and you'll see I have some apostrophes there, so that gives us an idea of just how fair this was. Tried in a court. 303 of them, it's a copy run over on the backside here. 303 of them were given the death sentence. 16 were given life in prison. Now, this text tells me that this trial was one day, and there were 392 people who were tried. I'm questioning how fair this trial was. If my life was going to be put under review, and if the death sentence was an option, I would be very insistent that that trial should take, probably I'd like it to be longer than a day. And I would like to make sure that I'm at least heard. And I wonder, with 392 people, how much they were allowed to speak and share for their experience. Let's just go through. I'm going to use my phone here. I'm going to take 24. That's how many hours in a day. Let's say that this trial happened for the entirety of the day. And then I'm going to go off and I'm going to take that 24 and I'm going to multiply it by 60 because that's how many minutes are in an hour. So there's 1,440 minutes. And now I'm going to take that and divide it by 392. That's how many Dakota prisoners were tried. So the answer that I'm about to get is how long, if everybody had a fair trial and the trial was exactly 24 hours one day, this is how many minutes one individual would be allotted during that trial. 3.6 minutes. Now, this, of course, wasn't the way that the trial was set, but in the most fair way to divide 392 people into a full day's trial, if this was the case, that means every person's life or death situation was decided in 3.6 minutes. Of course, that is not what happened, but it does raise some questions on that thick simulation we just did on my calculator. That does not show that these decisions were taken very serious. President Lincoln felt that executing that many people, 303 of them, would be a bad look for the government, and he changed the number to 39. These were the people who were directly convicted of being in a massacre and not those who were in participation in battle. What's the difference? Well, on this slide, Lincoln is saying that you can only be sentenced to death if you are tried and convicted of having taken part in a massacre. So what would be the difference between someone participating in a battle and participating in a massacre? What is Lincoln thinking? And we know Lincoln's background, he was a lawyer. What's he saying is the difference between a battle and a massacre? This slide is letting me know that we're going to be talking about one of the very impactful outcomes of that, and that is the Dakota Hangings. The Dakota Hangings were a very large part of the aftermath of the Dakota War. We're going to be examining the Dakota Hangings on another document, on another assignment. For our understanding on this assignment, we need to be aware that Lincoln ordered the hanging of 39, and then that was changed to 38, Dakota men who were tried and convicted of committing killings during the month of August and September. And we're going to see that 2 of these individuals were tried in absentee. They weren't present, and they are executed later. And that's what we're going to be seeing as we go through. You might be aware that there is a 36 plus 2, right? And the other thing to be aware of is after this hanging, 2 of these individuals were found to be hung mistakenly, and their identities, who people said they were not the individuals who were hung. And so we're going to see that 2 of these individuals were mistakenly hung for their actions. We're going to look at the hangings in another assignment. The passage on the right has a lot of the words that are hard to understand. And these words, we are going to use an online dictionary to understand what some of these words are. As we go through them, we can use an online dictionary, we can use our own textbook, whatever we need to do to understand what these words are. So I'm going to start off, go back to my slideshow mode. I'm going to read my passage, and this is written by an associate professor from the Minnesota Law School, Cheryl Chomsky, and she says about the trials. The trials of the Dakota were conducted unfairly in a variety of ways. The evidence was sparse. The tribunal was biased. The defendants were unrepresented in unfamiliar proceedings. These were conducted in a foreign language, and the authority for convening the trial, the tribunal, was lacking. More fundamentally, neither the military commission nor the reviewing authorities recognized that they were dealing with the aftermath of a war fought with a sovereign nation, and the men who surrendered are entitled to treatment in accordance to that status. So I have 3 underlined words here, and here I see 3 words. My definition goes into this box. And the way that I can do that, I can take on my document, zoom out, go back to your slide. I can take this tribunal, and if you look under tools, if you watch what I did, tribunal, tools, I can click dictionary, and it will tell me that a tribunal is a court of justice. So into this box, I could then write my answer, a court of justice, and often it looks like it might be with war. So I might going to say a court of justice, often with war. And then you'll do the same for biased and proceedings. You'll see that proceedings, and I'll do that one right now here, proceedings, I'm going to go back to dictionary. I'm going to type in proceedings. Proceedings, I want to know the legal sense of proceedings. So this could be something like, events or activities. So a proceedings would be like unfamiliar court. Right? Our next slide is the same, but you'll notice that our underlined words have changed. Same process. Find your word, go to tools, dictionary, and then you'll have your definition appear on the side. Pop back into my slideshow for the next slide. Sovereign, entitled, accordance. Same thing. All right, so now what? Now that I've made my annotated version of the quote on the last 3 slides, I write a summary description of what really happened. So that would go here. And you can go back and you can look at Ms. Chomsky's quote. You can look at your defined words. Put it all together. What do you see? We're going to make a prediction on this one. After the war and the trial, there were bounties, which are reward payments. And these bounties are made for getting the scalp. So you would cut off the top part of the head of a Dakota person. The price offered was $25 then, and that's equivalent to $625 today. Later on, that price goes up from $25 to $200, and that's equivalent to around $4,000 today. Our prediction question says, what effect do you believe that offering money for the payment of a scalp would have on the Dakota people living in Minnesota? So I might think about this, and to empathize, I might think about what effect there might be if there was a bounty put on teacher scalps. What might happen to teachers in Minnesota? Well, I certainly know that I wouldn't want to stay here. What might happen to the Dakota living if they had a reward put on their scalp? On this slide, it talks about our Dakota diaspora, and this means people who have left their homes. So I'm just going to, whoa, pop back in there. I'm going to hide myself over on that map. Using my planner, if I need to, write the names of the 4 states and the 2 Canadian provinces. We're going to skip Wisconsin. We could skip Wisconsin, right? It's Wisconsin. That the Dakota people went to after the war. So I'm going to use my map here. Here's Minnesota. That's our traverse to Sioux site in Mankato. The hangings happened there. There's New Ulm. Camp Release was mentioned over here in the Upper Sioux, Lower Sioux Agency, and that's our river valley. So I'm going to come up with my 4 states. So I'm going to follow my arrows, and 1, 2, 3, and 4. Right, we're skipping Wisconsin because we're going right through it. So my planner tells me the names of these states. And then it says 2 Canadian provinces, which are kind of like Canadian states. So I'm going to look up above here. This is my border of Canada is right there. Pops up a little bit. We own that. Haha, Canada. Right there. So these provinces. Now, I don't need to worry about this one because this one doesn't have a line going through it, does it? It's only going to be on these provinces. So the ones that I need to find a name for, I have 2 Canadian provinces, these 2. And then I need to find my states. I'm going to skip Wisconsin. So we're going to go for 1, 2, 3, and 4. All right, so I'm going to label 1, 2, 3, and 4. You'll also notice that I skipped this state. Clear out my screen. Clear out my screen. Total loss of life. There's a question mark after that. Total loss of life, huh? There are over 600 white deaths during the war. 70 of those were soldiers. 50 more were civilians who had weapons. So maybe that means that it could be like a farmer who picked up a rifle to defend his land. So he's not a soldier, but he had a weapon. And the rest were unarmed civilians. Now, a historian has gone back and using some cemetery records, they estimated, and we found a lot of church records of people's births, estimated that about 30% were under the age of 10. So alligator eats bigger numbers, so 30% were over 10 years of age, and 40% of those individuals who were killed were adults who are over 20, but under 40. So another way to say that would be individuals who are 20 to 40. This question below says, how many of those individuals then were civilians? And the way that we can find that out is we take our 600 and we subtract this, and we subtract that, and we subtract this. So 600 minus 70, and then again subtract that for 50. That answer goes here. Historians have names for 32 of the estimated 75 to 100 Dakota soldiers who died during the war. It does not count those individuals who are executed on December 26th in Mankato. There's a question mark up here. Why may historians not be able to know how many people truly died during this war? We can think back to our answer about Sandy Lake. How come we're not able to get a complete answer? On this last slide, summarize the events of the conflict. Now that we've looked through, write 3 to 4 sentences summarizing the conflict. You have a whole text box there. And the next slide. And the next slide says, explain the significance of the U.S.-Dakota War. Write an explanation sharing why that event is important within Minnesota history. You'll probably use 6 sentences here. Ending easy at the start of this presentation, I asked what you understood, what you knew, and you had a box to fill in for that information. And this last box asks, using the box on the right, do your views change? What changed during what you might have known already? If they did change, why? If they didn't change, why not? It doesn't matter if your views changed or if they didn't. This box still gets filled out. Awesome. And that's how to finish part 2 of this assignment. Again, go back, rewatch, pause, repeat, whatever you need to do to help make the sense of this for you. It'll be super helpful.